I walked into my mother-in-law's house for Thanksgiving dinner, expecting turkey and family chaos, but found only silence and my husband's stepfather Jensen, sitting alone in his wheelchair. A crumpled note on the kitchen counter that read, "Emergency in Miami with Constance's cancer treatment. Devin went to help. You'll stay and care for Jensen until we return Monday." The old man looked up at me with surprisingly sharp eyes and whispered, "Ready to learn who your husband really is?" I nodded, confused. 2 weeks later, Devin was on his knees begging me not to destroy everything he'd built on lies. The autumn leaves crunched under my tires. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As I pulled into the circular driveway of the Jameson family estate in Millbrook Heights, I'd driven 4 hours from Boston with the back seat packed with homemade cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole, and my grandmother's famous pumpkin bread, contributions to what was supposed to be our first Thanksgiving as a married couple with Devin's family. The sprawling colonial house sat silent against the gray November sky. No warm glow from windows, no sounds of football games or kitchen chaos, no cars in the driveway, except for a modest Honda that I recognized as belonging to Jensen Wild, Devin's 71-year-old stepfather. Strange. Devin's mother Rosie usually made Thanksgiving into a production worthy of a magazine spread, with extended family driving in from 3 states. I grabbed my contributions from the back seat and approached the front door, my heels clicking against the brick walkway. The doorbell echoed through what sounded like an empty house. After a minute of waiting, I tried the handle, unlocked, as always in this affluent neighborhood, where crime was something that happened to other people. "Hello?" I called out, stepping into the marble foyer. "Rosie? Devin?" My voice echoed back at me. The house felt hollow, lifeless. No delicious aromas of roasting turkey or baking pies, no cheerful chatter or Christmas music playing softly in the background. Just an uncomfortable silence that made my skin prickle. I set my dishes on the antique console table and walked toward the kitchen, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet house. That's when I saw him, Jensen Wild, sitting motionless in his wheelchair near the bay window, staring out at the empty yard. He was dressed neatly in a pressed button-down shirt and dark slacks, his silver hair combed carefully, but something about his posture suggested he'd been sitting there for hours. "Jensen?" I approached cautiously. "Where is everyone?" He turned his head slowly, and I was struck by how alert his pale blue eyes were. Devin had always described his stepfather as declining rapidly and barely there mentally, but the man looking at me now seemed fully present, almost calculating. "There's a note," he said quietly, gesturing toward the kitchen counter with a trembling hand. "Came for you." My heart began to race as I spotted the folded piece of paper on the granite countertop. I recognized Rosie's elegant handwriting immediately, the same script that had addressed our wedding invitations just 6 months ago. "Edith, emergency in Miami. Constance's cancer has taken a turn for the worse, and she needs immediate family support. Devin and I left Tuesday morning to help coordinate her treatment. You'll need to stay and care for Jensen until we return Monday evening. He's been having episodes and can't be left alone. There's leftover soup in the fridge. Call if it's a real emergency." I read the note twice, my hands beginning to shake. Constance Arlington was Devin's aunt, his mother's sister, and I knew she'd been battling breast cancer for the past year. But something felt wrong about this whole scenario. "When did they leave?" I asked Jensen, turning back to face him. "Tuesday morning," he replied, his voice stronger than I expected. "Before dawn, packed like they were going on vacation, not rushing to a medical emergency." I pulled out my phone to call Devin. Straight to voicemail, just like it had been for the past 2 days when I'd tried to confirm Thanksgiving plans. I'd assumed he was just busy with work. He was a financial advisor at Arlington and Associates, ironically the same firm where his Aunt Constance had worked before her illness. "I don't understand," I said, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. "We've been planning this Thanksgiving for weeks. I took time off work, bought all these groceries, made arrangements with my own family." Jensen wheeled his chair closer to me, moving with more agility than I'd ever seen from him before. "Check his social media," he suggested quietly. "Might be enlightening." I hesitated. Devin and I had always been private people, not the type to broadcast our lives online. But something in Jensen's tone made me open Instagram. I searched for Devon's profile, which he rarely used, and found it immediately. The latest post was from yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. The image made my blood run cold. Devon stood on what was clearly a luxury yacht, his arm around a petite brunette woman I'd never seen before. Both were holding champagne flutes, their faces tanned and relaxed. The caption read, "Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you need it most. #new beginnings #Miami vibes #grateful heart." But it was the location tag that made my hands tremble. South Beach Marina, Miami, and the timestamp, posted 18 hours ago. If Constance was dying, and this was a family emergency, why was my husband of 6 months posting romantic yacht photos with a strange woman? I scrolled through the comments, my stomach churning. The brunette woman, whose profile name was Mary Wayman, had commented with heart emojis. Devon had replied, "Best decision I ever made." "Find something interesting?" Jensen asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what I'd discovered. I turned my phone screen toward him, unable to find words. He studied the image for a long moment, then nodded grimly. "Mary Wayman," he said. "She's been calling the house for weeks asking for Devon. Claims she's a client, but I've been around long enough to recognize the tone of a woman who's more than professional acquaintances with a man." I felt like I was drowning. "How long have you known?" "That he's been cheating?" "About 2 months. That he was planning to leave you with me while he ran off with her." "Since Monday, when I overheard him on the phone making arrangements." Jensen's eyes hardened. He thought I was asleep. People always underestimate what the old man in the wheelchair can hear. I stared at this man I barely knew, my husband's stepfather, who had been dismissed by the family as a burden, a fading presence they tolerated out of obligation. But the person speaking to me now was sharp, aware, and apparently had been paying attention to everything happening in this house. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked. Jensen leaned forward in his wheelchair, his pale eyes intense. "Because, my dear Edith, I needed someone else to see what I've been seeing. Someone who could do something about it." He paused, studying my face. "Ready to learn who your husband really is?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I was only beginning to understand. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall against the bay window, and I realized that this Thanksgiving was going to change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and the family I'd believed I'd joined. "Yes," I whispered, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I'm ready." Jensen wheeled himself to the kitchen counter and opened a drawer I'd never seen him access before. With surprising dexterity, he pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on the granite surface between us. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice losing the frail quality I'd always associated with him, "you need to understand something about this family you married into, and you need to understand what's really been happening in this house." I stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. "Jensen, I don't know if I can handle any more revelations right now." "Oh, but you can," he replied with a slight smile that transformed his entire face. "You're stronger than they gave you credit for. That's why Devon chose you. He thought you'd be easy to control. And that's exactly why you're going to be his downfall." He opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be months of meticulous documentation. Bank statements, medical records, photographs, and handwritten notes filled with dates and times. Everything was organized with the precision of someone who'd spent a career in detailed work. "What is all this?" I asked, leaning closer despite my apprehension. "Evidence," Jensen said simply, "of systematic financial abuse, medical neglect, and fraud. Your husband and his mother have been using my declining health as a cover for stealing from me for over 2 years." I picked up one of the bank statements. It showed regular withdrawals of substantial amounts, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, always with notations like medical equipment, or home care supplies, or prescription medications. "These withdrawals," I said, running my finger down the list, "they're huge amounts, none of which went to my actual care." Jensen confirmed. "Want to see my real medical expenses?" He pulled out another folder. "This is what my insurance actually covers, and this is what I pay out of pocket. Compare that to what they've been taking from my accounts." The discrepancy was staggering. According to the documentation, Jensen's actual medical costs were less than $500 per month. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Devin and Rosie had been withdrawing nearly $7,000 monthly for his care. "Where's all this money going?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. Jensen smiled grimly. "That yacht your husband was posting about. It's a rental that costs $15,000 per week. The luxury hotel suite in South Beach, another $800 per night. Mary Wayman's designer wardrobe that she's been flaunting on her social media, all funded by my accounts." He showed me printed screenshots from Mary's Instagram, photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, spa treatments, all tagged with locations in Miami, and dated over the past 6 weeks. "You've been tracking this for how long?" I asked, amazed by the thoroughness of his documentation. "Since I started noticing the withdrawals didn't match my actual needs. I may be in this wheelchair, Edith, but there's nothing wrong with my mind. I was a forensic accountant for 35 years before my stroke. Old habits die hard." A forensic accountant. My husband had always described Jensen as a retired bookkeeper who'd worked for small businesses. The reality was clearly very different. "They don't know about your real background, do they?" I asked. "They never bothered to ask," Jensen replied. "Devin met me when I was already recovering from my stroke, already in this chair. Rosie told him I was just some minor accountant she'd married for companionship in her golden years. It suited them to see me as harmless and forgettable." I studied the man in front of me with new eyes. The careful way he organized his documents, the precision of his language, the strategic thinking behind his evidence collection. This wasn't a declining old man. This was someone who'd built a career on uncovering financial crimes. "Show me the rest," I said, my voice gaining strength. Jensen's eyes lit up with approval. "Now we're getting somewhere." He pulled out a section labeled medical neglect. Inside were photographs that made my stomach clench. Pictures of prescription bottles, nearly empty when they should have been full. Images of medical equipment that was clearly malfunctioning or improperly maintained. Documentation of missed doctor's appointments with notes like transportation unavailable when there were 3 cars in the garage. "They've been diluting my pain medication," Jensen explained matter-of-factly. "What should be a 10 milligrams dose becomes 5 milligrams because they're selling the rest. Physical therapy appointments get canceled because they're too expensive. But somehow there's always money for Rosie's spa days." "Jensen, I struggled for words. "This is elder abuse. It's criminal." "Yes, it is. And it's all documented, dated, and witnessed." He pointed to timestamps on the photos. "I've been building this case for 14 months. I just needed someone with legal standing to help me do something about it." I looked up sharply. "Legal standing? You're Devin's wife. You have access to accounts I don't. You can request financial records, make inquiries, ask questions that wouldn't seem suspicious coming from a concerned spouse." Jensen leaned forward intensely. "They've been using your marriage as part of their cover story. We need money for Jensen's care." Sounds so much more legitimate when it comes from a loving son and his devoted new wife. The implications hit me like a physical blow. "They've been using me as an unknowing accomplice." "Exactly. Every time you've been present when they discussed my expensive treatments or specialized equipment, you've been their unwitting witness. They've been building a narrative of devoted caregivers sacrificing for a sick family member." I thought back to conversations over the past 6 months. Rosie mentioning how expensive Jensen's medications were. Devin sighing about the cost of home modifications for wheelchair accessibility. My own sympathetic responses. My offers to help contribute to his care costs. "I even offered to help pay for your medical expenses," I whispered, mortified, "which they politely declined while telling you how touched they were by your generosity," Jensen finished. "They needed you as a character witness, not a financial contributor. Someone who could testify to their apparent devotion if anyone ever questioned their motives." I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The snow was falling heavier now, covering the manicured lawn in pristine white that felt like a mockery of the ugliness I was discovering inside this house. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked without turning around. "Much more. But first, I need to know something." Jensen's voice became serious. Are you ready to really commit to this? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your marriage, your relationship with this family, your entire life as you know it, it's all going to change. I turned to face him. This man I'd dismissed as a quiet, fading presence in the background of my new family. My marriage is already over, isn't it? Devon's made that choice for both of us. Yes, Jensen said gently. But the question is, are you going to let him destroy you in the process? Or are you going to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done? Not just to you, but to me, and probably to others we haven't discovered yet. I walked back to the table and looked down at the evidence spread before us. Months of careful documentation, proof of systematic abuse and theft, all compiled by a man who'd been dismissed as irrelevant by the very people exploiting him. What do you need me to do? I asked. Jensen's smile was sharp and satisfied. First, we're going to make sure they believe everything is proceeding according to their plan. Then, we're going to gather evidence they don't even know exists. And finally, we're going to ensure that when they return from their romantic getaway, they walk into consequences they never saw coming. He reached across and took my hand with his weathered one. Welcome to the resistance, Edith. Let's take back what they've stolen from both of us. Jensen directed me to his laptop, a high-end model that seemed oddly sophisticated for someone the family claimed was barely managing technology. As he logged in with swift practiced keystrokes, I realized how much of his apparent helplessness had been a carefully maintained facade. Banking records first, he said, pulling up multiple browser windows. I've maintained access to accounts they don't know I can monitor. The beauty of setting up your own financial systems years ago, you always have backdoor access. The first account that appeared on screen made me gasp. It was a joint checking account in Devon and Rosie's names, with a current balance of $127,000. Where did this money come from? I asked, scrolling through the transaction history. That's the question, isn't it? Jensen replied grimly. These deposits don't match either of their legitimate incomes. Devon makes good money as a financial advisor, maybe $85,000 annually. Rosie's been retired for 3 years. Yet look at these monthly deposits. I examined the pattern. Regular deposits of $6,000 to $8,000 every month, always from something called Arlington Trust Management. But there were other deposits too, irregular amounts ranging from $3,000 to $15,000, often with vague descriptions like consulting fees or estate services. Arlington Trust Management, I repeated. That's related to Constance's company, isn't it? Constance doesn't have cancer, Jensen said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? She's not dying, Edith. She's not even sick. She's very much alive, and apparently very much complicit in whatever scheme your husband has been running. Jensen clicked to another browser tab. Here's her Instagram from this morning. The image showed Constance Arlington, vibrant and healthy, standing in what appeared to be a luxury office, overlooking downtown Miami. She was holding a champagne flute and beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Celebrating the successful launch of our new venture. Sometimes the best investments are the ones no one sees coming. #new chapter #business, partners #Miami. Life." I stared at the screen in disbelief. But Devon said she was getting emergency cancer treatment. Emergency treatment for a cancer she never had, in a city where she's apparently starting a new business. Jensen's voice was steel. They've been planning this for months, possibly longer. He pulled up another document, email printouts that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Final transfer schedule November timeline." The email chain was between Devon, Rosie and Constance, dating back to August. As I read through them, a picture emerged of careful, calculated planning. From devon.jameson@arlingtonassuck.com to Rosie J. Dowald @gmail.com, carlington@arlingtontrust.com, date August 15th. Timeline confirmed for November execution. E will be out of state visiting family for Thanksgiving weekend, giving us 4-day window for final transfers. Jensen's account will be cleaned out by Monday, making it look like natural progression of his care costs. By the time anyone questions anything, we'll be established in Miami, with clean hands. From Carlington at arlingtontrust.com. Date August 15th. Office space secured in South Beach. LLC paperwork, filed under different names. Mary has been excellent cover knocker. Existing relationship with you provides perfect alibi for frequent Miami trips. Everything ready on my end. From rosiej.wild@gmail.com. Date August 17th. What about Jensen? He's been more alert lately. I'm worried he might catch on. From devon.jameson@arlingtonassuck.com. Date August 17th. Jensen won't be a problem much longer. Dr. Martinez confirmed his condition will deteriorate rapidly, without proper medication dosages. Natural causes, completely untraceable. Problem solves itself within 6 months. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the laptop steady. They're planning to kill you, I whispered. They've been slowly poisoning me for months, Jensen confirmed with chilling calm. Reducing my medications, introducing substances that exacerbate my condition, creating what will appear to be natural decline. I figured it out when I started feeling significantly worse, despite following my doctor's recommendations precisely. I jumped up from my chair and began pacing frantically. We have to call the police. The FBI. Someone. With what evidence that will hold up in court? Jensen asked pragmatically. These emails were obtained through my unauthorized access to their accounts. The medical poisoning is slow and subtle. Any toxicology would be inconclusive. And the financial transfers are all technically legal since I gave them power of attorney over my care expenses. Power of attorney? I stopped pacing. Something they convinced me to sign last year when I had a particularly bad health episode. They said it was just to help with medical decisions if I became incapacitated. Jensen's laugh was bitter. It's amazing what you'll sign when you trust people who claim to love you. I sat back down, overwhelmed by the scope of what we were facing. So they have legal authority to access your money, within limits. But they've been exceeding those limits for months, counting on my death to prevent any investigation. Jensen pulled up another document. However, what they don't know is that I had my lawyer install certain safeguards in that power of attorney. Automatic reviews, required medical confirmations for large expenditures, mandatory accounting, none of which they've been following. Your lawyer? Carl Wayman. Ironically enough, Mary's father. Jensen's smile was sharp. Small world, isn't it? He has no idea his daughter is involved in this scheme, but he's been documenting their violations of the power of attorney agreement for months, thinking it was just sloppy bookkeeping. The pieces were starting to come together in a way that made my head spin. So Mary's father is actually on our side without knowing it. Carl is a stickler for legal protocol. Every violation of that power of attorney agreement has been carefully documented in his files. He's been preparing a report for me about concerning irregularities that I was supposed to receive this week. Jensen clicked to his email and showed me a message from Carl Wayman dated 2 days ago. Jensen completed review of your accounts. Multiple serious violations of POA terms. Recommend immediate revocation and potential fraud charges. Call me Monday to discuss. They moved up their timeline, I realized. They left Tuesday morning because they knew this report was coming. Exactly. They're not just stealing from me and abandoning you. They're fleeing before the legal consequences catch up with them. Jensen's eyes were hard, but they made one crucial mistake. What's that? They assumed I'd be dead before anyone could act on Carl's findings. They also assumed you'd be the grieving, abandoned wife too devastated to ask difficult questions about my sudden death and their convenient departure. I thought about the note Rosie had left. The casual way they dumped me here with Jensen, the assumption that I'd simply accept their explanation and wait helplessly for their return. They need witnesses to their story, I said slowly. Understanding dawning. They need me to confirm that they were devoted caregivers who left reluctantly for a family emergency. Yes, and they need my death to appear natural and expected, with you present to testify to my declining condition. Jensen leaned forward intently. But what if instead of the helpless widow and the conveniently dead stepfather, they returned to face 2 very much alive people who've spent their absence gathering evidence of their crimes? I looked at this remarkable man who'd been systematically abused and underestimated, who'd used his supposed helplessness as cover while methodically building a case against his tormentors. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day I realized they were poisoning me. About 6 months ago." Jensen's smile was cold and calculating. "I've been playing the role of the declining old man while building the most comprehensive fraud case of my career. The only thing I was missing was a witness with legal standing who could corroborate their abuse of me. And then they abandoned me here with you. Gift-wrapped their own downfall." Jensen reached across and squeezed my hand. "They thought they were disposing of both of us. Instead, they've given us the perfect opportunity to destroy them." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a surge of determination I'd never experienced before. "What's our next move?" "Now we gather evidence they don't know exists, and we make sure that when they return from their romantic getaway, they find consequences waiting that they never could have imagined." Jensen wheeled himself to a bookshelf in the corner of the kitchen and pressed what appeared to be a decorative panel. To my amazement, a hidden compartment opened, revealing stacks of documents, recording devices, and what looked like a small surveillance system. 35 years as a forensic accountant teaches you to always have backup plans," he explained, pulling out a thick medical file. "And when people are trying to kill you, paranoia becomes a survival skill." He handed me the medical records, and I nearly dropped them when I saw the name at the top, Jensen Wild. But the address listed was in Switzerland, and the doctor's name was Dr. Klaus Brenner at the Geneva Medical Institute. "You've been getting secret medical treatment?" I asked, confused. "Not treatment, second opinions, and third opinions, and extensive testing to confirm what I suspected they were doing to me." Jensen's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "When you suspect your family is slowly poisoning you, you need irrefutable proof." I opened the file and began reading. The first document was a comprehensive toxicology report, dated 3 weeks ago. The findings made my stomach lurch. "Gradual arsenic exposure over approximately 8 months, I read aloud. "Consistent with small regular doses designed to mimic natural health decline in elderly patients with pre-existing conditions." "Keep reading," Jensen urged grimly. The next page detailed how the arsenic had been administered, through the dilution of his legitimate medications with a compound that would slowly accumulate in his system. The report noted that the dosage was carefully calculated to avoid acute poisoning, while ensuring progressive organ damage, consistent with natural age-related decline. I struggled for words. "This is sophisticated, medical-grade poisoning." "Rosie worked as a pharmaceutical technician before she married me," Jensen revealed. "She knows exactly how to manipulate medications without leaving obvious traces. The beauty of their plan was that my death would appear completely natural, an elderly man with existing health issues, succumbing to multiple organ failure." I flipped to the next section of the report, which detailed the antidotes and treatments Jensen had been secretly receiving. "You've been flying to Switzerland for treatment." "Not flying. Carl Wayman has been driving me once a month for what he thinks are routine medical consultations in the city. Rosie and Devin believe I'm going to a local clinic for basic checkups." Jensen smiled grimly. "Carl bills the trips as legal consultations, so they don't question the expenses." The medical report included photographs that made me physically ill. Images of Jensen's blood work showing dangerous toxin levels, scans revealing the damage to his liver and kidneys, and most damning of all, side-by-side photos of his medication bottles, one set showing what the pills should look like, and another showing the slightly different color and texture of the tampered versions. "How did you figure it out?" I asked, amazed by his methodical approach to exposing his own attempted murder. I started feeling worse despite following my prescriptions exactly. My forensic background made me naturally suspicious of coincidences. Jensen pulled out another file, so I began documenting everything. Every pill I took, every symptom I experienced, every interaction with Rosie or Devin around my medications. He showed me a detailed journal spanning 8 months. Each entry recorded the time, dosage, and source of his medications, along with detailed notes about his physical reactions. The pattern was clear. On days when Rosie personally prepared his medications, his symptoms were significantly worse. But the real breakthrough came when I started secretly filming the medication preparation, Jensen continued, producing a small sophisticated camera system. Rosie thought I was too confused and weak to notice what she was doing. She was wrong. He connected the camera to his laptop and pulled up a series of video files. The first one was dated 6 weeks ago and showed Rosie in the kitchen, carefully emptying Jensen's prescription capsules and mixing the contents with a white powder before refilling them. She's adding the arsenic directly to my heart medication, Jensen explained as we watched her methodical work. The dosage is small enough that each individual pill wouldn't trigger acute symptoms, but the cumulative effect over months has been devastating. The next video showed her disposing of the empty arsenic container in a neighbor's trash bin 3 houses away. Always covering her tracks, Jensen noted. She's been very careful to ensure nothing could be traced back to this house. Jensen, this is attempted murder. We have video evidence of her poisoning you. We have evidence, but we need more, he replied. Murder charges require proving intent, and they could claim this was some kind of misguided attempt to help with my symptoms. We need to demonstrate the broader pattern of abuse and the financial motives. He pulled out another set of documents, bank records I hadn't seen before. These are my real assets, Edith. The accounts they've been stealing from represent only about 15% of my actual wealth. I stared at the numbers on the page. Multiple investment accounts, property holdings and trust funds totaling nearly $4.2 million. They don't know about these. They know I have some retirement savings, but they have no idea about the extent of my holdings. I spent my career helping wealthy clients hide assets from various threats. I learned a few things about financial privacy myself. Jensen's eyes gleamed. They think they're stealing my life savings when they're actually just taking my spending money. Why haven't you used this money to protect yourself, hire bodyguards, move somewhere safe? Because running away wouldn't solve the problem, Jensen said firmly. They'd just find another victim, probably someone without my resources or knowledge. Besides, I need them to complete their crime in order to ensure they face appropriate consequences. I realized what he was saying. You've been using yourself as bait. I've been gathering evidence while managing the poisoning with medical interventions they don't know about. The Swiss doctors have been helping me process the toxins while maintaining the appearance of decline. Jensen's voice took on a steely quality. But there's something else you need to know about why this goes beyond just money and murder. He pulled out a final folder, this one marked with a red tab. Devin and Rosie aren't first-time offenders. This is their third elderly victim. The folder contained newspaper clippings and legal documents spanning the past 5 years. Harold Jameson, Devin's biological father, died under suspicious circumstances in 2019. Sudden organ failure, natural causes, but notice the pattern. The documentation showed Harold's rapid decline over his final months, substantial withdrawals from his accounts for medical care, and Devin inheriting everything. The similarities are striking, I murmured reading through the timeline. And before that, Rosie's first husband Edmund Wild, my predecessor. He died in 2017, also from sudden organ failure, also after months of expensive medical treatments that depleted his savings. I looked up at Jensen in horror. They're serial killers. They're a very sophisticated financial murder team, Jensen confirmed. They target elderly men with assets, marry into the family, gradually gain control of finances and medical care, then systematically murder them while making it appear natural. The insurance payouts and inheritances fund their lifestyle until they need the next victim. And you're victim number 3, I was supposed to be. But unlike Harold and Edmund, I had the background to recognize what was happening, and the resources to fight back. Jensen's smile was grim but determined. The difference is, I've been building a case not just against my own attempted murder, but against a pattern of serial elder abuse that spans nearly a decade. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what Jensen had uncovered. How many more victims might there be? That's what we're going to find out. Because when Devin and Rosie return from their romantic getaway, they're not just going to face consequences for my attempted murder and your abandonment. They're going to face a federal investigation into multiple homicides. Jensen reached across and took my hand. Are you ready to help me stop serial killers, Edith? Because that's what we're really dealing with here. I squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of protective fury I'd never experienced before. Let's destroy them. As the weight of Jensen's revelations settled over me, a terrible clarity began to emerge about my own marriage. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through photos from the past 6 months, seeing everything with new eyes. Jensen, I said slowly, I think they've been grooming me too. He looked up sharply from organizing his evidence. What do you mean? I showed him a photo from our wedding reception. Look at this picture. Devon's talking to someone off camera, but look at his expression. He's not looking at me like a man in love. He's looking at me like I'm a problem he's solved. The photo captured Devon mid-conversation. His face turned away from me as I smiled beside him in my wedding dress. His expression was calculating, satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with marital bliss. They rushed the engagement. I continued, pieces falling into place. We'd only been dating 8 months when Devon proposed. I thought it was romantic, spontaneous. But now you realize it was strategic, Jensen finished. Tell me about the timeline. When did you first meet Devon? I thought back, my stomach churning. February of this year. He approached me at a coffee shop near my work, said he'd seen me there before, and finally worked up the courage to ask me out. I paused, a horrible thought occurring to me. But I'd never seen him there before that day. Jensen nodded grimly. He was scouting you. What's your profession, Edith? I'm a social worker specializing in elder care advocacy. I replied, then immediately understood the implications. Oh my God. They didn't choose you randomly. They needed someone whose professional background would lend credibility to their story as devoted caregivers. Jensen pulled out a notebook and began writing. What else? Think about the progression of your relationship. I forced myself to remember details I'd previously romanticized. He was very interested in my work from the beginning, asked lots of questions about elder care regulations, about how families navigate end-of-life decisions, about what constitutes proper medical care for elderly patients. He was using you as a consultant for their murder method. Jensen said bluntly. The memory hit me like a physical blow. About 3 months into our relationship, he started asking hypothetical questions. What would you do if a family member was suffering and wanted to stop aggressive treatment? How do social workers determine if an elderly person is receiving adequate care? I scrolled through old text messages, finding conversations that now seemed sinister. Devon asking about my work cases, particularly interested in situations where families had disagreements about medical care. Me, naive and in love, sharing professional insights that he was probably using to refine their killing method. There's more, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He insisted we get married quickly, said he didn't want to wait because life was too short, especially after watching you struggle with your health. I thought he was being romantic and philosophical. He needed you legally bound to him before his plan with me was complete, Jensen observed. A devoted wife provides much better cover than a girlfriend who might disappear if things got complicated. I thought about our joint bank account, how Devon had convinced me to pool our finances for easier management, how he'd encouraged me to list him as beneficiary on my retirement accounts and life insurance, how he'd suggested I might want to take a leave of absence from work after we married to focus on family. He's been isolating me, I realized, suggesting I might be happier working from home, that my job was too stressful, that I should consider starting a family soon instead of focusing on my career. Classic abuse pattern, Jensen confirmed. Make the victim financially dependent, socially isolated and legally vulnerable. I pulled up my banking app with trembling fingers. Our joint account, which should have had about $8,000 from both our contributions, showed a balance of $1,200. He's been taking my money too, I said, showing Jensen the screen. Small amounts over the past 2 months. I thought it was for wedding expenses and household items. Funding his escape plan, Jensen said. Did he encourage you to make any major financial decisions recently? My blood ran cold. Last month he suggested I cash out my retirement fund to help with a family investment opportunity. Said it would be better to have liquid assets we could access quickly if we needed them for your medical care. How much? $47,000. I was going to do it next week as a Christmas surprise for him. I felt physically sick. He was going to steal my entire retirement fund and disappear. Jensen made more notes. What about your family, friends, support network? I thought about how Devin had gradually discouraged my relationships. He said my best friend Sarah was jealous of our happiness and was trying to cause problems. Convinced me that my sister was overly critical of him, and that it was better to keep some distance until she came around. My parents live across the country, and he's been discouraging visits, saying we needed to save money for your care, and couldn't afford travel. Complete isolation, Jensen observed. By the time they returned from Miami, you would have been financially depleted, socially isolated and emotionally dependent on their version of events. The perfect witness to testify about their devoted care of me, and their tragic need to leave for a family emergency. I stared at my phone, scrolling through months of manipulation disguised as love. How did I not see this? Because you're a good person who assumes others have good intentions, Jensen said gently. It's what makes you excellent at your job helping vulnerable people. It's also what made you an ideal target for predators. A new realization hit me. Jensen, if they've done this to others, there might be other women like me, other wives or girlfriends who were manipulated into being unwitting accomplices. Jensen's eyes lit up. Harold's son mentioned his father had started dating someone new before he died, and Edmund had a live-in girlfriend during his final months. Where are those women now? That, Jensen said, is an excellent question, one that law enforcement is going to be very interested in answering. I felt a surge of determination replace the shame and horror. We need to find them. If they're alive, they might have evidence. If they're not, then Devin and Rosie are responsible for even more deaths than we know about, Jensen finished. Either way, it strengthens our case and potentially saves future victims. I stood up, pacing as my mind raced. I have access to databases through my work. I can research these women, find out what happened to them. Carefully, Jensen warned. We can't leave digital fingerprints that might alert Devin if he's monitoring your accounts. He's not that sophisticated, is he? Jensen's smile was grim. Edith, they've successfully murdered at least 2 people, and nearly killed me while maintaining perfect legal cover. Never underestimate how sophisticated they really are. The scope of what we were facing was staggering, but for the first time since reading that abandonment note, I felt like I had purpose instead of just pain. What's our next step? I asked. Now we start building the case that's going to put them away forever. Jensen wheeled himself to another section of his hidden compartment and withdrew what appeared to be an ordinary tablet. But as he powered it on, I realized this was no consumer device. The interface looked like something from a government agency. 40 years in forensic accounting doesn't just teach you about following money trails, he said, navigating through encrypted folders. It teaches you about creating them, hiding them, and when necessary, exposing them in ways that can't be traced or tampered with. He opened a file labeled Project Justice, and my jaw dropped. The screen showed a complex web of interconnected financial networks, real estate holdings, and investment portfolios that spanned multiple countries. Jensen, what am I looking at? My real net worth, he replied, matter-of-factly. The accounts Devin and Rosie have been stealing from represent roughly $300,000 of what's essentially my petty cash. My actual assets total approximately $12.7 million. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. Multiple Swiss bank accounts, properties in 3 countries, a sophisticated investment portfolio, and what appeared to be an entire legitimate business empire. How is this possible? Devin thinks you're living on a modest pension, because that's exactly what I wanted them to think. Jensen smiled with satisfaction. My official retirement from Hartford and Associates showed a standard accountant's pension. What it didn't show was that I'd been running a private consulting firm specializing in asset recovery for high net worth individuals for the past 15 years. He clicked to another folder labeled Client Portfolio. The list of names made me gasp. Fortune 500 CEOs, Hollywood celebrities, tech billionaires, even some names I recognized from international news. I help wealthy people recover stolen assets, expose financial fraud, and protect their holdings from various threats, Jensen explained. It's extremely lucrative work, and it requires absolute discretion. So when Devin and Rosie thought they were targeting a vulnerable elderly man, they were actually targeting someone who specializes in catching people exactly like them. Jensen's eyes gleamed. And I've been using every resource at my disposal to build an airtight case against them. He opened another file showing what appeared to be a private investigation firm's logo, Wayman Security Solutions. My heart stopped when I saw the name. Carl Wayman doesn't just run a law practice, Jensen continued. His son Arden runs one of the most sophisticated private investigation firms on the East Coast. They specialize in financial crimes and have direct connections to federal law enforcement. Arden Wayman, I repeated. Mary's brother, who has no idea his sister is involved in a serial murder scheme, but who has been helping me investigate suspicious financial patterns for the past 6 months. Jensen pulled up communication logs. He thinks he's been hired to investigate general elder fraud in the area. He doesn't know it's specifically about his sister's boyfriend's family. The irony was staggering. So we have the resources of a major private investigation firm working on our case, and they don't even know they're investigating their own family member. It gets better. Jensen opened another folder. Through my consulting work, I've developed relationships with prosecutors in 3 states who specialize in elder abuse cases. One of them, District Attorney Constance Arlington. Wait, I interrupted. Constance Arlington. Like Devin's Aunt Constance? Jensen's smile was predatory. Different Constance Arlington. Pure coincidence of names, but it's going to be very confusing for Devin when he realizes that the DA who's been building a case against him shares a name with his fake dying aunt. I sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of Jensen's hidden resources. You've been planning this for months. I've been planning this since I realized what they were doing to me. But when I discovered the pattern with Harold and Edmund, I knew I needed to think bigger than just protecting myself. Jensen leaned forward intensely. What we're building here isn't just a case against Devin and Rosie. We're building a federal conspiracy case that's going to expose an entire network of elder fraud. He clicked to a file that made my blood run cold, because they're not working alone. The document showed connections between Devin and Rosie's activities and similar patterns in 4 other states. Names, dates, financial transfers, and what appeared to be a coordinated network of people targeting elderly victims using nearly identical methods. This is a criminal organization, I whispered. A very sophisticated one. They've been operating across state lines for nearly a decade, with Devin and Rosie as just one cell in a larger network. Jensen's voice was grim. The good news is that federal prosecutors love cases like this. The bad news is that we're dealing with people far more dangerous than simple greedy relatives. I thought about Mary Wayman, about the carefully planned timeline, about the professional-level medication tampering. How did you figure out there were others? Financial patterns. The money they've been stealing from me doesn't just disappear. It goes through a sophisticated laundering system before funding their lifestyle. That kind of infrastructure doesn't exist for small-time criminals. Jensen pulled up bank routing information that looked like a spider web. Follow the money, and you find the organization. Are we in danger? I asked, suddenly realizing that we might be facing more than just Devin and Rosie's return. We would be, if they knew what we'd discovered. But they think I'm a dying old man, and you're a helpless abandoned wife. They have no idea they left their money trail with someone who specializes in unraveling financial conspiracies. Jensen opened one final folder, and I saw why he'd been so confident about our chances. Federal Agent Marcus Arlington, no relation to either Constance, has been working on elder fraud cases in our region for 2 years. He's been looking for exactly the kind of evidence we've been collecting. The file showed months of correspondence between Jensen and the FBI agent. Jensen hadn't just been gathering evidence, he'd been preparing to hand over a complete federal case. We're not just going to destroy Devin and Rosie, Jensen said with quiet satisfaction. We're going to help the FBI take down an entire criminal network that's been preying on elderly victims across multiple states. I looked at this remarkable man who'd been systematically poisoned while secretly building a case that would make headlines. How long before we contact Agent Arlington? Tomorrow morning, Jensen replied. But first, we need to set one more trap. Because when Devin and Rosie return from Miami, they need to believe everything is going according to their plan right up until the FBI arrests them. The scope of what we were undertaking was staggering, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had not just hope but overwhelming advantages our enemies didn't know existed. What's our next move? I asked. Now we make them think they're winning, while we prepare to destroy them completely. The next morning brought an early visitor that changed everything. A sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway at exactly 8 a.m., and Jensen smiled with satisfaction as he watched from the window. Right on time, he said, straightening his shirt. Edith, meet the cavalry. A tall woman in her 40s emerged from the car, carrying a briefcase and moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. She had silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything around her. That's District Attorney Constance Arlington, Jensen explained as the doorbell rang. Not Devin's fake dying aunt, but the prosecutor who's going to put his real family behind bars. I opened the door to find myself face to face with one of the most formidable women I'd ever encountered. DA Arlington's handshake was firm, her smile warm but professional. Mrs. Jameson, she said, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but Jensen has briefed me on your situation. We're here to help. The we became clear as a second car arrived. A younger man in a FBI windbreaker stepped out, followed by someone I recognized from the photos Jensen had shown me, Arden Wayman, Mary's brother. Agent Marcus Arlington, the FBI agent, introduced himself, and I nearly laughed at the absurdity of having two Arlingtons working our case. And I believe you know Arden Wayman from Jensen's files. Arden's face was grim as he shook my hand. Mrs. Jameson, I need you to know that everything we discuss here is separate from my family relationship with Mary. What she's allegedly involved in, it's not who I thought she was. We gathered around Jensen's kitchen table, which had been transformed into a command center overnight. DA Arlington opened her briefcase and pulled out official-looking documents. Jensen has provided us with preliminary evidence of what appears to be an extensive elder fraud operation, she began. Based on his documentation, we're prepared to move forward with multiple charges including attempted murder, financial fraud and conspiracy. Agent Arlington spread out photographs and financial records. The investigation has expanded beyond your immediate case. We've identified at least 6 other victims across 4 states, all following similar patterns. 6 other victims? I asked, horrified. Harold Jameson and Edmund Wild were just the beginning, Arden explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. We've found evidence of similar schemes in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Elderly men, sudden health declines, substantial financial transfers, and timely deaths. DA Arlington handed me a legal document. We're prepared to offer you full immunity and witness protection in exchange for your cooperation in building the case. Your testimony about their manipulation tactics and your professional insights into elder care will be crucial. I read through the immunity agreement, surprised by how comprehensive it was. This covers everything, even the things I unknowingly helped them with. You were a victim, not a conspirator, Agent Arlington assured me. Your professional background actually makes your testimony more valuable, not more problematic. Jensen pulled out his tablet and showed them the video evidence of Rosie tampering with his medications. We have direct evidence of the attempted murder, but I need to know, how do we handle the fact that I've been secretly treating the poisoning? DA Arlington studied the medical records Jensen provided. Your Swiss medical treatment actually strengthens our case. It shows premeditation on their part and demonstrates that you were acting in self-defense. Dr. Brenner has agreed to testify about the sophisticated nature of the poisoning. Arden's phone buzzed and his expression darkened as he read the message. We have a problem. Mary just posted on social media from Miami. She's not supposed to return until Monday, but the post is tagged at Miami International Airport with a timestamp from an hour ago. They're coming back early, I said, my heart racing. Agent Arlington stood immediately. How much time do we need to finish preparing the evidence? The documentation is ready, Jensen replied. But we need them to actually return to the house and incriminate themselves further. If they suspect anything and disappear, they won't suspect anything. DA Arlington said firmly. Because as far as they know, you're a dying old man and a devastated abandoned wife. We're going to make sure that's exactly what they find when they walk through that door. She opened another section of her briefcase and pulled out what appeared to be surveillance equipment. We're going to wire this house with audio and video monitoring. When they return and discuss their crimes, thinking they're safe, we'll have everything on record. Arden was already setting up technical equipment I didn't recognize. These are federal-grade surveillance devices, invisible to casual inspection, but they'll capture everything said in this house with courtroom-quality clarity. What about our safety? I asked, suddenly realizing we'd be alone with suspected serial killers. Agent Arlington showed me a small device that looked like a medical alert pendant. Panic button. Press it once, and we'll have tactical units here within 3 minutes. The house will be under constant surveillance from unmarked vehicles. DA Arlington handed me a detailed script. When they return, you need to act exactly as they expect. Confused, hurt, overwhelmed by Jensen's condition. Let them talk. Let them explain their story. The more they say, the stronger our case becomes. Jensen was studying the surveillance setup with professional appreciation. How long have you been planning this operation? Since your first contact 3 months ago, Agent Arlington admitted. We've been building parallel investigations in all 4 states. Your case was the missing piece that connected everything. I realized the scope of what had been happening behind the scenes. You've been using us as bait, with your consent and protection, DA Arlington clarified. Jensen understood the risks when he contacted us. We needed active evidence of their criminal behavior, not just historical documentation. Arden finished installing a camera so small, I couldn't see it even when he pointed to its location. They'll never know they're being recorded. And the audio pickup is sensitive enough to capture whispered conversations from anywhere in the house. Gent Arlington's radio crackled with a message I couldn't understand, but his expression became urgent. Flight from Miami just landed. If they drove straight here, they'll arrive within 2 hours. DA Arlington stood and began packing her briefcase. Remember, you're victims until the moment we arrest them. Act confused, act hurt, but most importantly, act like you believe their story. As the law enforcement team prepared to leave, I felt a mixture of terror and determination. We were about to face suspected serial killers, but we had the full weight of federal law enforcement backing us. One more thing, Jensen said as they reached the door. When this is over, I want to establish a foundation to help other elder abuse victims. Some of my assets should go toward making sure this never happens to anyone else. DA Arlington smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from her. I think that's exactly what Harold and Edmund would have wanted. As their cars pulled away, Jensen and I were left alone with our surveillance equipment and our plan. In less than 2 hours, Devin and Rosie would walk into a trap they'd never see coming. Ready for the performance of our lives? Jensen asked. Let's end this, I replied. With Devin and Rosie's imminent return, Jensen and I had to transform ourselves back into the helpless victims they expected to find. The irony wasn't lost on me. After discovering our own power, we now had to perform powerlessness perfectly. The key to a successful deception, Jensen explained as he helped me arrange fake medical equipment around his wheelchair, is to give them exactly what they want to see, but with details that will incriminate them further. I was applying makeup to make myself look exhausted and overwhelmed, when Jensen's phone rang. The caller ID made my blood freeze. Rosie Wild, answer it, Jensen whispered, activating the recording app. Remember, you're confused and barely holding it together. I took a deep breath and answered with a shaky voice. Hello, Edith? Oh honey, how are you holding up? Rosie's voice was sickeningly sweet, filled with fake concern. We're about to leave the airport. How's Dad doing? I let my voice break convincingly. He's been asking for you. The confusion is getting worse, and his breathing. I made a sobbing sound. I don't think I can handle this much longer, Rosie. Oh sweetheart, we'll be there soon. Has he been taking his medications? The question was loaded. She was checking whether her poisoning schedule had continued. I've been giving him everything exactly as you labeled it, I replied, which was technically true since I'd been giving him the untampered versions Jensen had hidden. Good girl, that's so important for his condition. Rosie's satisfaction was audible. We should be there within the hour. Don't worry, everything is going to be fine soon. The call ended, and Jensen smiled grimly. Perfect. She just confirmed she's been controlling my medication regimen, and she's satisfied that the poisoning has continued. I set up the final elements of our deception. Jensen had coached me on exactly how to make him appear worse than he actually was. Strategic lighting, careful positioning, and subtle makeup to enhance the effects of his declining condition. Remember, Jensen said as I helped him into bed, when they arrive, I should appear confused but not completely gone. I need to be lucid enough to ask questions that will make them reveal their plans. I scattered medical supplies around the room, including empty medication bottles and fake medical reports that Jensen had prepared. Anyone looking quickly would see evidence of expensive treatments and declining health. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway made my heart race. Through the window, I could see Devin and Mary getting out of a rental car, both looking tanned and relaxed from their Miami vacation. Rosie emerged from the passenger seat, already putting on her concerned family member expression. Places, Jensen whispered, settling into his performance pose. Remember, you're barely keeping it together. I messed up my hair, removed my shoes to look disheveled, and positioned myself in the uncomfortable chair beside Jensen's bed, where I'd supposedly been maintaining a vigil. The front door opened with familiar voices echoing through the house. Edith, Dad, we're home. Devin's voice carried false cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. In here, I called weakly, adding a tremor to my voice. They appeared in the doorway, and I had to admire their acting skills. Devin immediately looked concerned and guilty, while Rosie rushed to Jensen's bedside with perfect maternal worry. Oh my God, Dad, you look terrible, Rosie said, taking his hand. Has it been this bad the whole time? Jensen's performance was masterful. He looked up at her with confused recognition, his voice weak but present. Rosie, you're back? I thought you were taking care of Constance. We were, Dad. Her treatment went well, so we came back as soon as we could. Rosie's lie came smoothly as she checked his pulse with practiced efficiency. Devin moved to my side, his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that would have once comforted me, but now made my skin crawl. Honey, you look exhausted. This must have been so hard on you. I tried to do everything right, I said, letting genuine emotion from the past few days color my voice. But he kept getting worse, and I was so scared. You did perfectly, Devin assured me, his voice full of fake gratitude. Taking care of Dad is exactly what family does. Rosie was examining the medication bottles, and I watched her carefully count pills to ensure the poisoning schedule had been maintained. Her satisfied nod told me she believed Jensen had continued receiving the tampered medications. Has he been eating? She asked. Barely anything, I replied truthfully, since Jensen had been carefully managing his diet to counteract the expected poisoning effects. Just soup and crackers mostly. That's normal for his condition, Rosie said, with authority that made me want to scream. The important thing is that he's been getting his medications consistently. Jensen stirred, appearing to focus on Devin with effort. Devin, son, I've been thinking about the money. About what happens. Devin and Rosie exchanged a look that the surveillance cameras would capture perfectly. Don't worry about money, Dad, Devin said, his voice gentle, but his eyes calculating. We've been taking care of everything. You don't need to worry about financial matters anymore. But the accounts, Jensen persisted with perfect confusion. I can't remember. Did I sign something? You signed papers, so we could help you, Dad, Rosie explained patiently. Remember, so we could pay for your medical care and handle things when you're not feeling well. I watched Jensen's performance, knowing he was leading them exactly where law enforcement needed them to go. Every word they spoke was being recorded, every admission of controlling his finances and medical care, adding to the evidence against them. I'm so tired, Jensen said, weakly. Maybe it's time to. Don't talk like that, Dad, Rosie interrupted quickly. You just need rest. We're going to take such good care of you now that we're back. Devon's phone buzzed, and he stepped into the hallway to take the call. I could hear him speaking in hushed tones about finalizing arrangements and Monday transfer schedules. When he returned, his expression was satisfied, but carefully controlled. That was the bank, he announced. Everything is set up for Monday morning. All the paperwork for Dad's care account transfers. Rosie smiled with relief. Perfect timing. Dad will be more comfortable, knowing everything is handled properly. I realized they were discussing the final theft of Jensen's known assets, planned for Monday morning when they assumed he'd be too incapacitated to object or even understand. You both must be exhausted from your trip, I said, playing my role perfectly. Was Constance's treatment successful? Another loaded look between them. She's going to be fine, Devon said smoothly. The doctors were very optimistic. She'll be starting a new treatment plan that should help her tremendously. Every lie, every careful word, every false expression of concern was being captured by federal surveillance equipment. They had no idea they were providing a complete confession to attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. As they settled in for what they believed would be a quiet Sunday evening before completing their crime, I felt a surge of savage satisfaction. Tomorrow morning, instead of stealing Jensen's final assets, they would be facing federal agents with handcuffs. The trap was set perfectly, and they had walked into it exactly as planned. Sunday morning brought an unexpected complication that turned into a perfect opportunity. As Devon and Rosie settled into their false narrative of devoted caregivers, the doorbell rang at 9:30 a.m. I'll get it, I said, maintaining my exhausted caregiver act as I shuffled to the door. Mrs. Eleanor Wayman stood on the porch, Erden and Mary's mother, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing an expression of genuine concern. My heart raced as I realized we were about to have a Wayman family encounter that could either strengthen or destroy our case. Edith dear, she said warmly, I heard through the neighborhood that Jensen took a turn for the worse while his family was away. I brought some of my famous chicken and dumpling soup. Behind me I could hear Devon and Rosie's hushed conversation stopping abruptly. They clearly hadn't expected community attention to their return. Mrs. Wayman, that's so kind, I said, genuinely touched despite the circumstances. Please, come in. As Eleanor entered, Devon appeared with his most charming smile. Mrs. Wayman, how thoughtful of you to check on Dad. Eleanor's expression shifted subtly as she took in Devon's healthy tanned appearance. My, you look well for someone who's been dealing with a family medical emergency. Was the treatment successful for your aunt? I watched Devon's micro-expressions carefully. He hadn't expected to be questioned by neighbors about their cover story. Yes, thankfully, he replied smoothly. We were able to get back sooner than expected. Dad needed us here. Eleanor moved past him toward Jensen's room, her trained nurse's eye immediately assessing the situation. She'd worked as a pediatric nurse for 30 years before retirement, and I could see her professional instincts engaging. Hello, Jensen, she said gently, taking his hand. How are you feeling today? Jensen's performance was perfect. Eleanor, is that you? I wasn't sure if you were real or if I was dreaming again. Eleanor examined his color, felt his pulse, and observed his breathing with professional efficiency. What she was seeing didn't match what she expected from someone who was supposedly dying. Have you been getting your physical therapy? She asked, a question that made Rosie tense visibly. Physical therapy is too taxing for him now, Rosie interjected quickly. The doctor said to focus on comfort care. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. Which doctor? Dr. Martinez has been very aggressive about maintaining mobility in elderly patients, even in palliative care. A specialist, Devon said vaguely. Someone who understands Dad's specific condition better. I could see Eleanor filing away these inconsistencies. Her son Arden had inherited his investigative instincts from somewhere. Well, Eleanor said, straightening up, I think I'll call Dr. Martinez myself. As a neighbor and former medical professional, I feel responsible for checking on Jensen's care standards. The color drained from Rosie's face. That's really not necessary. We have everything under control. I'm sure you do, Eleanor replied pleasantly, but her tone had cooled. Still, second opinions are always valuable in complex medical situations. After Eleanor left, Promising to return with more soup later, Devin and Rosie's anxiety was palpable. They hadn't planned for community scrutiny of their story. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Harold Jameson's former neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Santos, whom Jensen had secretly contacted through his investigation network. "I heard Jensen was declining," she said, studying Devin carefully. "It's remarkable how these things seem to run in families. Poor Harold went through something very similar before he passed." Devin's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "I lived next door to your father for 15 years, Patricia replied. "I remember how quickly his health declined in those final months. Very similar timeline to what I'm hearing about Jensen." She turned to Rosie with sharp eyes. "You were so devoted to Harold during his illness. Just like you're being with Jensen now. It must be exhausting, caring for these elderly men in their final stages." Rosie's smile was strained. "It's what family does." "Indeed," Patricia said, meaningfully. "I remember thinking the same thing about how you cared for Edmund before you married Harold. Such a pattern of selfless devotion." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia was revealing that she knew about the connection between all three deaths. Devin stepped forward aggressively. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We really need to focus on Dad's care right now." "Of course," Patricia agreed. "I just wanted to offer support. It's wonderful that you were able to cut short your Miami vacation to be here for Jensen's final days." She emphasized Miami vacation in a way that made it clear she knew exactly what their trip had really been about. After she left, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Devin paced the living room while Rosie frantically checked social media to see what neighbors might have observed or shared online. "This is a problem," Devin muttered, forgetting to keep his voice down near the surveillance equipment. "If people start asking questions, people always ask questions when someone dies," Rosie replied. "That's why we stick to the story. Natural decline, devoted family, medical complications. It worked before. Before we didn't have neighbors comparing notes about patterns." Devin shot back. The doorbell rang a third time, and I opened it to find 3 more neighbors bearing food and flowers. Word was spreading through the community that Jensen was dying, and the response was an outpouring of genuine care that contrasted sharply with his family's behavior. Each visitor brought stories about Jensen that painted a picture of a vibrant, engaged community member, nothing like the confused, declining man Devin and Rosie had described to outsiders. Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down mentioned seeing Jensen in his garden, just 3 weeks ago, working with tools and demonstrating clear coordination and mental acuity. Mr. Rodriguez shared how Jensen had helped him with tax questions the previous month, showing financial expertise and sharp thinking. Young Tommy from across the street talked about Jensen helping him with math homework via the fence, proving his mind was completely clear and functional. Each testimony, captured by surveillance equipment, directly contradicted the medical decline narrative that Devin and Rosie had been building to justify their theft and prepare for his death. By evening, Devin and Rosie were visibly rattled. The community attention they hadn't anticipated was creating witness testimony that would destroy their defense of acting in Jensen's best interests. "Maybe we should consider moving the timeline up," Rosie whispered to Devin as they thought I was out of earshot. "Too risky now," Devin replied. "Too many people watching. We stick to Monday morning and get out of here as planned." What they didn't realize was that Monday morning wouldn't bring the completion of their crime. Instead, it would bring federal agents with arrest warrants, and a community full of witnesses ready to testify about their lies. The neighborhood that was supposed to provide anonymity for their crime had instead become a network of witnesses who would ensure justice was served. Sunday evening brought the final phase of our preparation. While Devin and Rosie believed they were settling in for their last night before completing their crime, Jensen and I were coordinating the final details that would ensure their downfall. At 9 p.m. I received a text from an unknown number, "Package delivery tomorrow 8 a.m. sharp. Your friends." It was the code from Agent Arlington, confirming that federal agents would be in position for Devin and Rosie's planned Monday morning bank visit. Jensen had spent the afternoon using a secure encrypted communication system to finalize arrangements with his international legal team. The hidden compartment in his bookshelf had been transformed into a command center that would have impressed any intelligence agency. "The Swiss medical testimony is confirmed," he whispered to me as we pretended to organize his medications. "Dr. Brenner will be available for video deposition, and the toxicology evidence has been forwarded to the FBI crime lab." I nodded, checking that the surveillance equipment was still functioning properly. "What about your real assets? Are they protected?" "Completely secured. As of this afternoon, control of my actual wealth has been transferred to a legal trust with you as the primary beneficiary." Jensen's smile was satisfied. "Even if something goes wrong tomorrow, they'll never get their hands on my real money." The irony was perfect. While Devin and Rosie planned to steal what they thought were Jensen's life savings, his actual $12.7 million fortune was beyond their reach, protected by legal structures they didn't even know existed. Around 10 p.m., Devin made a phone call that the surveillance system captured perfectly. I listened from the kitchen as he spoke to someone named Vincent about finalizing the transfer procedures for the elderly client. "Everything needs to be cleaned out by noon," Devin said quietly. "The old man won't be in any condition to object, and the wife is too overwhelmed to ask questions. Standard protocol, medical emergency justification for expedited processing." The call confirmed that Devin was part of a larger operation with established procedures for stealing from elderly victims. Every word was being recorded by federal equipment. Rosie spent the evening preparing what she called Jensen's final medications, a process I watched through hidden cameras as she dissolved additional white powder into his pills. She was planning to deliver a lethal dose that would complete their murder plan. "The timing has to be perfect," she murmured to herself, unaware she was being recorded. "Enough to finish the job, but not so fast that it looks suspicious." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to avoid showing my rage. This woman was calmly planning murder while acting like a devoted stepmother. At 11 p.m., Jensen activated his encrypted communication system one final time. A video call connected him with a familiar face, Carl Wayman, Mary's father and Jensen's attorney. "Carl," Jensen said quietly, "I need you to witness something very important." Carl's face on the screen was grave. "Are you sure about this timing, Jensen?" "Once we execute this final phase, I'm certain," Jensen replied. "Tomorrow morning, they'll attempt to complete the theft of my known assets. But before they can, I need to officially transfer ownership of this house and all my documented holdings to Edith." I stared at him in shock. "Jensen, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "This ensures that no matter what happens tomorrow, they can't claim any legal right to property or assets. Everything they think they're inheriting becomes legally yours before they can touch it." Carl guided us through the electronic signing process for documents that transferred the deed to the house, Jensen's known bank accounts, and his documented investment portfolio to my name. The total value was still substantial, nearly $800,000 in assets that Devin and Rosie believed would be theirs. "The transfers are effective immediately," Carl confirmed. "As of midnight tonight, Edith Jameson owns all of Jensen's documented assets. Any attempt to access these accounts without her permission would constitute theft." After the call ended, Jensen leaned back in his wheelchair with satisfaction. "Now they can't claim they were acting on my behalf, or within their legal authority. Any move they make tomorrow morning will be explicitly criminal." I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Jensen had done. "Why are you trusting me with all of this?" "Because in 4 days, you've shown me more genuine care than my family has in 4 years," Jensen replied simply. "Because you're the kind of person who deserves to benefit from a lifetime of honest work, and because I want them to understand exactly what they've lost through their greed and cruelty." At midnight, I received another text: "All assets secured. Tomorrow belongs to justice. K. Day Arlington was confirming that every legal piece was in place. Jensen and I spent the final hour reviewing our performance strategy for the morning. When Devin and Rosie attempted to access his accounts, they would discover that all funds had been transferred to someone else. Their reaction to that discovery, captured on surveillance, would provide the final evidence of their criminal intent. Remember, Jensen coached me, when they realize the money is gone, they'll be desperate. Desperate people make mistakes and reveal their true nature. I looked at this remarkable man who had turned his own attempted murder into an elaborate trap for serial killers. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "I've been ready for months," Jensen replied. "The question is, are you ready to watch them destroy themselves?" As I prepared for what might be our last night in this house, I felt a strange sense of peace. Everything was in place. The law enforcement team was positioned. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal protections were absolute. Tomorrow morning, Devin and Rosie would discover that their carefully planned crime had become their complete undoing, and I would finally get to stop pretending to be a victim and start enjoying being a victor. The trap was set perfectly, and in just a few hours, it would spring shut with the force of federal justice behind it. Monday morning at 7:30 a.m., Devin's phone rang with the call that would seal his fate. He answered eagerly, expecting confirmation from his criminal contacts that everything was ready for the final asset transfer. "Vincent," Devin said, stepping into the hallway where he thought he was out of earshot. "Please tell me everything is set up for this morning." But it wasn't Vincent on the other end. It was Agent Arlington, using Vincent's phone after the FBI had arrested him an hour earlier. "There's been a complication," Agent Arlington said, disguising his voice. "The old man's accounts show some irregular activity overnight. Someone transferred large amounts out of the system." I watched Devin's face turn pale as he processed this information. "What do you mean transferred out? That's impossible. He can barely sign his own name." "I'm looking at electronic transfers made at midnight," Agent Arlington continued. "Nearly $800,000 moved to an account under the wife's name. Did you know about this?" Devin's mask of concerned family member shattered completely. "That manipulative bitch," he hissed, forgetting to keep his voice down. "I knew we should have handled her differently." The surveillance equipment captured every word as Devin revealed his true feelings about me and his awareness of the financial manipulation. "What do you want me to do?" Agent Arlington asked, still playing the role of Vincent. "We stick to the plan," Devin said coldly. "The old man dies today regardless. If the wife has the money, we'll find a way to get it back. She's not smart enough to hide it from us. And if she resists..." Devin's laugh was chilling. "Accidents happen. Grieving widows sometimes have unfortunate incidents while dealing with their loss." Agent Arlington had gotten exactly what he needed. Devin explicitly planning not just theft and murder, but also threatening to kill me to access the money. The conversation was being recorded with federal-grade equipment that would be admissible in any court. When Devin returned to the kitchen, his demeanor had shifted. There was something predatory in his eyes that made my skin crawl, but I maintained my exhausted caregiver act. "Honey," he said, his voice artificially sweet. "I need to ask you something important. Did you do anything with Dad's accounts last night?" I looked up at him with confused innocence. "What do you mean?" "I've been with Jensen all night. He had another difficult episode around midnight. Someone moved money out of his accounts," Devin said, watching my reaction carefully. "Large amounts. The bank is showing transfers to an account in your name." I let my face show genuine shock, which wasn't hard since I was genuinely surprised he'd found out so quickly. "That's impossible. I don't have access to Jensen's accounts." Rosie appeared in the doorway, her face tight with suspicion. "The bank called this morning. They're saying all of Dad's funds have been transferred to Edith." "I don't understand," I said, letting my voice shake. Jensen was so confused last night. He kept talking about protecting his money, but I thought it was just the illness talking. Devin and Rosie exchanged a look that the surveillance cameras captured perfectly, the look of predators realizing their prey might have escaped. "What exactly did Dad say last night?" Rosie demanded. I pretended to think carefully. "He kept saying something about making sure the right person got his money. He was asking for papers, talking about lawyers. I thought he was just confused about his medications." "Did he sign anything?" Devin asked urgently. "I don't know," I replied helplessly. "He had me bring him some documents from his desk, but I couldn't read them in the dark. He said it was important to protect his family." The beauty of my performance was that every word was technically true, while leading them to believe Jensen had acted in confusion rather than with careful planning. Devin's phone buzzed with another call. This time it really was from the bank. calling to inform him that his power of attorney over Jensen's accounts had been revoked, and all funds transferred to a new account holder. "This is impossible," Devin shouted into the phone. "My father is incompetent. He can't make these kinds of decisions." But the bank representative had been briefed by federal agents. "Sir, our records show Mr. Wild was examined by 2 independent physicians yesterday, who certified his mental competence. All transfers were properly witnessed and notarized." When Devin hung up, his face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "That bastard played us," he said to Rosie. "He's been faking the confusion, or she's been manipulating him," Rosie replied, her eyes fixed on me with undisguised hatred. The test call had worked perfectly. Devin and Rosie's true nature was now fully exposed on federal surveillance, and they had revealed not just their past crimes, but their willingness to commit additional murders to get what they wanted. The trap was springing shut exactly as planned. At 8:45 a.m., just as Devin and Rosie were planning their next move against me, reality intervened in a way none of us had anticipated. Jensen, who had been performing weakness so convincingly, suddenly wasn't performing anymore. I was in the kitchen when I heard a genuine cry of distress from his room. Racing back, I found Jensen slumped in his wheelchair, his breathing labored and his skin taking on a grayish pallor that had nothing to do with makeup or staging. "Jensen," I knelt beside him, and his eyes struggled to focus on mine. "The Swiss medication," he whispered urgently. "Missed yesterday's dose. Too focused on the plan." My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. In the intensity of preparing for Devin and Rosie's return, Jensen had skipped the antidote treatments that had been keeping him alive despite the arsenic poisoning. The toxins in his system were finally overwhelming his body's defenses. Devin appeared in the doorway, and for a moment, I saw genuine alarm cross his face. This wasn't part of their timeline. Jensen was supposed to die after they'd secured his assets, not before. "What's happening?" Devin demanded, his voice caught between fake concern and real panic. "I think he's having a cardiac episode," I said, my medical training kicking in as I checked Jensen's pulse. It was weak and irregular, nothing like the strong, steady heartbeat I'd felt during our planning sessions. Rosie pushed past Devin, her pharmaceutical background making her assess the situation quickly. "His pupils are dilated," she observed with clinical detachment. "Respiratory distress, cardiovascular instability, classic systemic failure." What she didn't realize was that she was describing the cumulative effects of months of arsenic poisoning, finally reaching critical levels. Jensen's hand found mine, squeezing with what little strength he had left. "The emergency protocol," he whispered so quietly only I could hear. "Red folder, under the bed." I understood immediately. Jensen had prepared for this possibility, that the stress of the final confrontation might push his poison system beyond its limits. Under his bed was an emergency medical kit, and instructions for a final antidote dose that might save him. But Devin was watching my every move now, suspicious of any action I might take. "We should call 911, I said, pulling out my phone. "No," Devin said quickly, grabbing my wrist. "Dad has a DNR order. He wouldn't want aggressive medical intervention." It was a lie, and we all knew it. Devin was terrified that hospital treatment would reveal the arsenic poisoning and expose their entire scheme. Jensen's breathing became more shallow, and I realized with growing horror that he might actually die before the FBI could arrest his killers. The ultimate irony, after months of careful planning, the stress of executing justice might cost Jensen his life. "Please," I begged Devin, genuine tears streaming down my face. "Let me call for help." "Absolutely not," Rosie said firmly. "This is natural progression of his condition. Calling paramedics would only prolong his suffering." In that moment, the surveillance equipment captured something crucial: Devin and Rosie actively preventing medical care for a dying man, demonstrating their willingness to let him die even when it wasn't part of their plan. Jensen's eyes met mine one last time, and I saw him mouth words that the cameras wouldn't catch. "Trust the plan." Then his eyes closed, and his breathing became so shallow I could barely detect it. Devin and Rosie exchanged satisfied looks, believing their problem was solving itself. They had no idea that hidden in Jensen's wheelchair was a panic button that would bring federal agents crashing through the door within minutes. But as I watched Jensen's life hanging by a thread, I realized our carefully orchestrated plan meant nothing if the man who'd risked everything to expose these killers didn't survive to see justice served. My hand moved toward the emergency medical kit hidden under his bed, knowing I might have only seconds to save his life before Devin stopped me. As Jensen's breathing grew more labored, I made a desperate decision. While Devin and Rosie watched with cold satisfaction, I pretended to comfort Jensen, but was actually reaching for the emergency medical kit hidden beneath his bed. "I'm here," I whispered to him, my fingers finding the small vial of emergency antidote Dr. Brenner had provided. "Stay with me." Devin moved closer, suspicious of my actions. "What are you doing?" "Just holding his hand," I replied, my voice breaking with genuine emotion. He shouldn't die alone. What Devin couldn't see was that I was using a concealed syringe to inject the antidote into Jensen's IV port, a port that Rosie thought contained her poisonous medication, but had actually been switched with saline days ago. Within moments, Jensen's color began to improve slightly. His breathing, while still labored, became more regular, but I could see in his eyes that he understood this was likely his final opportunity to speak. "Edith," he whispered, just loud enough for the surveillance equipment to capture the testimony. Now, I realized what he was asking. Jensen wanted to give his final statement while Devin and Rosie were present, creating an unbreakable record of their crimes, witnessed by them directly. "Devin," Jensen said, his voice gaining surprising strength, "come closer. Need to tell you something." Devin approached reluctantly, probably expecting a dying man's blessing or forgiveness that would help assuage any future guilt. Instead, Jensen looked directly into his stepson's eyes and spoke with crystal clarity. "I know what you've been doing. The arsenic in my medications. Rosie's been poisoning me for months." Devin's face went white. "Dad, you're confused. The illness, I have video evidence," Jensen continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Hidden cameras, recorded everything. Rosie tampering with my pills, your phone calls, planning my murder." Rosie stepped forward, her mask of concern finally slipping completely. "You're hallucinating, Jensen. This is just the illness talking." "Harold Jameson," Jensen said clearly. "Edmund Wilde. You killed them, the same way. I have documentation of all 3 murders." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Jensen's labored breathing. Devin and Rosie stood frozen, realizing that their dying victim had somehow outmaneuvered them completely. "The money you've been stealing," Jensen continued with remarkable clarity, "it's all documented. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every lie you told about my medical care." He turned his head toward the hidden camera locations, speaking directly to the federal agents he knew were listening. "My name is Jensen Wilde. Today is Monday, November 27th. Devin Jameson and Rosie Wilde have been systematically poisoning me with arsenic for 8 months. They have stolen over $200,000 from my accounts while providing inadequate medical care. They planned to complete my murder today after stealing my remaining assets." Devin lunged forward, trying to cover Jensen's mouth, but it was too late. The testimony was complete and recorded. "You have no idea," Jensen whispered to Devin with a slight smile, "how much I've enjoyed watching you walk into this trap." In that moment, Jensen had accomplished something remarkable. Despite being poisoned, despite facing death, despite months of abuse, he had managed to deliver a clear, unambiguous confession that would ensure his killers faced justice. The antidote was buying him precious time, but I could see he was still desperately weak. His final act of defiance had taken nearly everything he had left. "The FBI will be here any moment," Jensen added quietly. "I've been working with them for months." As if summoned by his words, we heard the sound of car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps approaching the front door. Jensen looked at me one last time, his eyes clear despite his failing body. "Thank you for showing me what real kindness looks like." The front door burst open, and Agent Arlington's voice rang through the house. "FBI, nobody move." Jensen had survived long enough to see justice arrive. The moment FBI agents burst through the front door, the carefully orchestrated plan reached its crescendo. Agent Arlington led a team of 6 federal agents, each moving with practiced precision as they secured the scene. "Devin Jameson, Rosie Wild, you're under arrest," Agent Arlington announced, his voice carrying the weight of months of investigation. "You have the right to remain silent." Devin's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and panic. "This is insane. We're the victims here. Dad's been manipulated by this woman." He pointed accusingly at me. "Sir, step away from Mr. Wild, and put your hands behind your back," Agent Arlington commanded, producing handcuffs. But Rosie was already calculating, her pharmaceutical background making her assess escape options. "I demand to see a warrant," she said coldly. "You can't just burst into our home without." "We have multiple warrants," DA Arlington said, entering behind the agents with a thick folder of legal documents. "Search warrants, arrest warrants, and seizure orders for all financial accounts and properties." As handcuffs clicked onto Devin's wrists, he turned to me with pure hatred. "You manipulative bitch. I should have handled you differently from the beginning." "Sir, anything you say can and will be used against you in court," Agent Arlington warned, but Devin was too enraged to stop talking. "You think you're so smart," he snarled at me. "We've done this before, and we'll do it again. There are others like us, and they'll finish what we started." Agent Arlington smiled grimly. "Actually, Mr. Jameson, they won't. We arrested your entire network this morning. Vincent Martinez, Carol Henderson, David Santos, all in federal custody as of 6 a.m. The color drained from Devin's face as he realized the scope of the FBI operation. This wasn't just about Jensen's case, it was a coordinated takedown of the entire elder fraud conspiracy. Rosie tried a different approach, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "This is all a misunderstanding. We were caring for Jensen according to his doctor's orders. We never meant any harm." "Ma'am," DA Arlington replied, "we have video evidence of you tampering with Mr. Wild's medications, recorded conversations planning his murder, and documentation of similar crimes involving Harold Jameson and Edmund Wild." Paramedics arrived as the arrests continued, immediately attending to Jensen, who was conscious but weak. Dr. Brenner had flown in from Switzerland overnight, and was now directing his emergency treatment. "The antidote is working," Dr. Brenner announced, after checking Jensen's vital signs. "He should make a full recovery with proper medical support." As Devin and Rosie were led away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered on the street to witness the culmination of months of investigation. Mrs. Wayman stood on her porch, tears in her eyes as she realized her daughter Mary had been part of this conspiracy. "How long have you known?" she asked Agent Arlington. "We've been building this case for 8 months, he replied. "Your son Arden's investigation was crucial to uncovering the full scope of their operation." Inside the house, forensic accountants were already documenting the evidence Jensen had meticulously collected. His hidden surveillance system had captured everything needed for prosecution. "Mr. Wild," Agent Arlington said to Jensen as he was being prepared for transport to the hospital, "your cooperation made this possible. We estimate your evidence will help us prosecute over 20 individuals across 4 states." Jensen managed a weak smile. "Just make sure they can never do this to anyone else." As the ambulance prepared to take Jensen to the hospital, I realized our ordeal was finally over. The house that had been a prison of deception was now filled with federal agents ensuring justice would be served. The surveillance equipment was being carefully removed as evidence, every recorded conversation and video that would put Devin and Rosie away for the rest of their lives. Devin's final words, as he was placed in the federal transport vehicle, were captured by news crews who had arrived. "This isn't over. You'll never be safe." But looking at the overwhelming law enforcement presence, and knowing that their entire criminal network had been dismantled, I felt safer than I had in months. The stage was set for trials that would make headlines and ensure that no other elderly victims would suffer what Jensen had endured. 2 hours after the arrests, I found myself in the federal courthouse facing Devin and Rosie one final time. Their lawyers had demanded an immediate arraignment, hoping to secure bail before the full scope of evidence became public. Day Arlington had asked me to attend, knowing that seeing their victims alive and empowered would be crucial for the prosecution's opening statement. Devin sat in orange prison garb, his tanned vacation glow now sickly under the fluorescent courthouse lights. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, the hatred was unmistakable. "Your Honor," Devin's attorney began, "my client is a respected financial advisor with no prior criminal record. These allegations stem from a family dispute over end-of-life care." "Objection," Day Arlington interrupted smoothly. "The defendant was recorded planning multiple murders and threatening additional victims." Judge Patricia Hammond, a stern woman in her 60s, raised her hand for silence. "I'll hear the evidence before considering bail." What followed was a systematic destruction of Devin and Rosie's carefully constructed facade. Agent Arlington presented the video evidence of Rosie tampering with medications, the recorded phone calls planning Jensen's death, and the financial records showing systematic theft. But the most devastating moment came when they played Jensen's final testimony from that morning. His clear, measured voice filled the courtroom as he named his poisoners and detailed their crimes. Devin's face grew increasingly pale as months of recorded evidence was presented. Conversations he thought were private, financial transfers he believed were untraceable, and medical records he assumed would never be questioned. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Day Arlington continued, "we have evidence connecting these defendants to similar crimes in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Harold Jamison, Edmund Wild, and potentially 6 other elderly victims." Rosie's attorney tried a different approach. "Your Honor, my client is a dedicated caregiver who was recorded discussing the best way to administer fatal doses of poison." Judge Hammond interrupted, reviewing the evidence summary. "I've seen enough." The moment of truth arrived when Judge Hammond addressed the defendants directly. "Mr. Jamison, Miss Wild, you stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, financial fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise across state lines. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly individuals for financial gain." Devin finally exploded. "This is all lies. That old man manipulated everyone. And his wife," he pointed at me with shaking hands, "she seduced him into changing his will. She's the real criminal here." "Mr. Jamison," Judge Hammond said coldly, "you're addressing the victim of your alleged crimes. Mrs. Jamison has cooperated fully with federal investigators and is protected by immunity agreements." The look of pure rage on Devin's face when he realized I was legally untouchable was almost worth the months of manipulation I'd endured. Rosie tried one last desperate plea. "Your Honor," Jensen was confused, dying. "We were only trying to help. By poisoning him with arsenic?" DA Arlington interjected, holding up the toxicology reports. "By stealing his money while providing inadequate medical care? By planning to kill his daughter-in-law to cover your tracks?" Judge Hammond's decision was swift and final. Bail is denied. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending trial. As they were led away, Devin turned back to shout at me one final time. "You'll never be safe. We have friends, who are all in federal custody," Agent Arlington called out calmly. "Your entire network was arrested this morning." Watching Devin and Rosie disappear through the courthouse doors in shackles, I felt a profound sense of closure. These people who had seen me as a pawn in their deadly game were now facing life in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded DA Arlington as she announced the charges. "This case represents one of the largest elder fraud conspiracies prosecuted in federal court. We believe the defendants may be responsible for up to 12 deaths across multiple states." As I walked down the courthouse steps, I realized that my nightmare was finally over, and Devin and Rosie's was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse was packed for what the media had dubbed the Thanksgiving conspiracy trial. I sat in the front row as DA Arlington delivered the prosecution's final statement to a jury that had heard weeks of devastating evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case represents one of the most calculated and cruel criminal enterprises we have ever prosecuted. The defendants didn't just steal money, they systematically murdered elderly victims while convincing communities they were devoted caregivers." Jensen, now fully recovered and sitting beside me, squeezed my hand as the prosecutor laid out the full scope of Devin and Rosie's crimes. The antidote treatments had saved his life, and his testimony over the past weeks had been instrumental in securing convictions. The evidence shows that Harold Jamison, Edmund Wild, and 7 other elderly victims across 4 states were murdered using identical methods. Arsenic poisoning disguised as natural decline, financial theft justified as medical expenses, and carefully planned timelines to avoid suspicion. Judge Hammond had allowed cameras in the courtroom, and I watched Devin's face on the monitors as each victim was named. He showed no remorse, only the cold calculation of someone mentally tallying his crimes. Furthermore, DA Arlington continued, "We have evidence of a criminal network spanning 6 states, with the defendants training others in their murder methods. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. This was a business model built on killing vulnerable elderly people." When the guilty verdicts were read, Devin's reaction was exactly what I expected. No shame, no apology, just anger that his lucrative murder scheme had been exposed. "Devin Jamison, you are sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse and racketeering," Judge Hammond announced. "Rosie Wild, you are sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole for the same charges, with additional time for your role as the primary poison administrator." As they were led away in shackles, I felt a profound sense of justice. Not revenge, justice. These people would never hurt another elderly person again. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Arlington approached us after the sentencing. "Mr. Wild, Mrs. Jamison, I have some news about the restitution orders," he said with a smile. "The court has ordered the seizure of all assets acquired through their criminal enterprise. Every penny they stole, every property they bought, every luxury item they purchased, it's all being returned to victims' families." "What does that mean for the other victims?" Jensen asked. "It means Harold Jamison's son will get his father's stolen money back. Edmund Wild's daughter will receive what was taken from her father, and the families of all 9 confirmed victims will finally see justice." The financial restitution totaled over $4.7 million, money that would now help victims' families rebuild their lives instead of funding more murders. Outside the courthouse, Jensen and I faced a sea of reporters asking about our experience. Jensen's response was perfect. No elderly person should ever fear that their family will see them as a burden instead of a blessing. "We hope this case prevents other families from suffering what we endured." As we walked away from the courthouse, I realized that our terrible Thanksgiving abandonment had become something greater, a federal case that would protect countless future victims from predators like Devin and Rosie. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of what had once been Jensen's house of horrors, but was now our shared home, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for a very different kind of family gathering. Jensen, fully recovered and sharper than ever, was in his study coordinating the Jensen Wild Foundation for Elder Justice. Using his $12.7 million fortune, we'd established a nonprofit that provided legal aid, medical advocacy and financial protection for elderly victims of abuse. "Edith," he called out, "Agent Arlington just confirmed that our foundation's work led to 3 more arrests this week. Copycat schemes in Florida and Arizona." I smiled, stirring the cranberry sauce that had never made it to that fateful Thanksgiving table. "How many does that make total?" 47 criminals prosecuted, 63 elderly victims protected, and over $12 million in stolen assets recovered, Jensen replied with satisfaction. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find familiar faces. Mrs. Eleanor Wayman, now a volunteer advocate with our foundation, and her son Arden, whose investigation skills had proven invaluable in expanding our protective network. "Mary sends her apologies from federal prison," Eleanor said dryly. "She's apparently found religion, and wants to make amends for her crimes." We all laughed, not from cruelty, but from the absurdity of thinking apologies could undo attempted murder. As we gathered around the dinner table, I reflected on the transformation my life had undergone. I was no longer the naive social worker who'd been manipulated by a charming predator. I was the co-director of a foundation that had become a national model for elder protection. Jensen raised his glass of wine, not the port he'd saved for an anniversary that never came, but a celebratory vintage marking our first year of successful advocacy work. To second chances, he said simply. To justice, I added. To family, Eleanor concluded. The kind you choose, not the kind that tries to poison you. Outside, snow was beginning to fall just like it had that terrible Thanksgiving when I'd discovered my husband's betrayal. But inside our warm house, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for each other, I felt nothing but gratitude. Devon was serving life in federal prison, along with Rosie and 45 other members of their criminal network. Their appeals had been denied, their assets seized, and their reign of terror permanently ended. I'd kept Jensen's name, not because I wanted to remember my failed marriage, but because I wanted to honor the man who'd saved my life by allowing me to save his. As we shared our Thanksgiving meal, I realized that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest victories. Jensen and I had found each other in our darkest moment, and built something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. Next year, Jensen said with a mischievous smile, let's skip the federal sting operation and just have a normal holiday dinner. We all laughed, grateful for the peace that justice had finally brought to our lives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.